You know, I'm so glad to be here. My first exposure to the Valley was in, I believe, September of this year. And I was doing some programs for schools and libraries and things like that. And a lot of these librarians said, don't drink the water, because if you do, you'll never leave. You know, I wrote a song about that. I'm going to put that on my third CD that's coming up, about that line. And but it's true. I've really fallen in love with this place, and this is now my 5th trip down here, and I'm just so grateful for this opportunity. I teach college English online because my schedule is such that, you know, I have to be mobile, and I am a storyteller, both Scots-Irish stories and Civil War stories. And last year I did 150 presentations at schools, libraries, and festivals, mostly across the South. I am impressed that you have the interest in history. It's hard to get students interested in things. Like, I teach writing, and it's hard to get the students to be interested even in the writing they're turning into. And I had one student that came to me and said, Mr. Pittman, I don't think I deserve the 0 you gave me on my essay. And I said, I don't either, son, but it's the lowest grade I could give you. But it's, you know, and maybe that got his attention, I don't know. But Civil War in Texas. When Texas declared its independence on March 2nd, they kept that day to declare their secession. And it's very important that you understand that this war we're talking about was not the Hollywood War, you know, that said it was started to end slavery. Okay, now slavery was an abomination. Everyone knew it. It was on its way out. And it was an issue, but it wasn't the cause. Now, before I set up secession and understand the mindset of Texas, let me tell you how I know that. 5 of the Yankee states fighting the southern states were also slave states. So if you have slave states fighting slave states, the war wasn't started to end slavery. It was started over something else. And you know what that something else was? It was the right to walk away from something. Texas and the other states felt, we joined the Union voluntarily, we can leave it voluntarily. All right? And, of course, the other opposing point of view said, no, you can't. Now, what I compare that to is a wife that comes to a husband and says, this isn't working out, I'm going to leave. And then he beats her until she stays. You know, that's the analogy. It's kind of harsh, but that's the analogy that I like to use. Now, also, about the slavery issue, the 2 generals at Appomattox, when General Lee surrendered the Army of Virginia, which was one of the 3 armies of the Confederacy, to Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee had no slaves and did not believe in slavery. Now, I'm going to mention him again in connection with the Valley here in a second. But General Grant had slaves until the end of the war. So if you have the Yankee general with slaves and the Southern general without slaves, it wasn't started to just end slavery. Also, many people don't know that slavery was legal in Washington, D.C., Lincoln's capital, until the end of 1862, until the end of the 2nd year of the war. So Hollywood has kind of changed a lot of things, and certainly Hollywood has ignored much of what has happened here in the Valley. Texas sent 90,000 men into the Confederate Army. 2,000 men fought with the Union during the Civil War, or as many describe the war between the states, or as a lady in Mississippi put it, that recent unpleasantness. You know, and so many of them never came home. And Texas was forever changed. Now, we still bear markers of that war. We have over 27 counties that are named after Confederate leaders, over, you know, no telling how many cities and bridges and roads and schools. And so it permanently marked our state. Now, something else about Texas in these early years, and this is, I'm going to use this as a segue into what my first story. So what I'm going to do is some stories and songs to give you a little perspective of this war. And the importance of it. Now, in the Valley, Robert E. Lee was in Rio Grande City when he heard that succession, that the Sumter had, the succession had been declared and everything. His words were, has it so soon come to this? So he knew it was coming, but didn't like really the idea. He was here, by the way, to as a military leader to help quell the raids and ravaging influence of Juan Cortina. Kind of a man who was a folk hero, a farmer, a rancher, a rebel, and soldier, and all kinds of other things, who actually took over Brownsville for a while until Santos Benavides ran him out. And you talk about Robert E. Lee, Juan Cortina, Ben McCullough, the Texas general that died at Pea Ridge, Santos Benavides, the mayor of Laredo, colonel of the 33rd Texas Cavalry that never lost a battle anywhere. His two brothers were captains in that unit. Great piece to study there. When we think about the companies in the Confederate and Federal Army that were almost totally Tejano, we think of Lieutenant Joseph de la Garza that died at Mansfield, Itura that was with the 3rd Texas, Rustilios de Navarro, one of the Navarros, that were with Hood's 6th Texas Infantry, the Federal Army of the 2nd Texas that was entirely Tejano. So many stories need to be told. Now, and sometimes there's some funny stories too, like Miss Betty here informed me that at least there was a law in the books of Brownsville that no camels were allowed in the city limits, And the reason for that, it goes back to the Civil War. Because in 1856, Jefferson Davis, as Secretary of War, allowed and funded an experiment to bring camels to the Southwest. And, they did exploratory trips to Big Bend and other things. And during the Civil War, the Confederates, largely led by a man that I just discovered and I'm going to have to do some more study on, Bethel Coopwood, captured the camels from the Federals and began using them to haul cotton. And a cotton bale is what, 500 pounds, and these camels could carry 2 at a time, extremely strong. But the problem was they scared the horses, and they were offensive to people. Camels bite, spit, and stink. And so I guess Brownsville passed that law. But there's so many stories that need to be told. I found stories of Scots and Irish, and Wilson was sharing with me a story of an Irishman that we're trying to run down and look up. But there's so many things in this valley that need to be told. And I hope that you will take my card, and as you discover new stories in the valley, I hope that you will write me and share those with me. Now, I'm going to start by showing you this war is really a complex thing. This is my book, Jim Limber Davis, Black Wolf in the Confederate White House. Many people don't know it, but the South, before the war, that would be the antebellum South, and during the war, had thousands of free people of color. The Texas Cavalry. You've heard the story of Theodore Roosevelt and the teddy bear thing and how that was invented. The hunter that roped the bear and dragged it into Theodore Roosevelt that he refused to shoot was a black hunter from Mississippi by the name of Holt Collier, and he was in the Texas Cavalry. Okay. Very famous man, best shot in Mississippi. There's a plaque dedicated to him in Vicksburg and some other places too. But Texas, Louisiana, Virginia especially, had sizable populations of people of color, free people of color. They weren't anybody's property, they could have jobs. Some of them were actually quite wealthy and influential. Texas has a lot of stories. But this is a story of Jim Limber Davis, Jim Limber and his parents, who were free people of color in Richmond, Virginia, during the Civil War. Jim's parents died of a fever, and Jim was placed in the care of a guardian in the neighborhood. We think it was a relative, but we're not totally sure. But whoever this guardian was didn't want Jim or like him. Now, if you're an orphan and you're given to somebody that doesn't want you or like you, your life is going to be miserable. And Jim's life was. He was abused terribly. Well, one day, Verena Davis, the wife of Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy, and remember in Texas we do have a Jeff Davis County, was driving her buggy through the streets of Richmond. She looks over and sees this guardian hurting this little boy. Now, I don't mean just paddling him. She wouldn't have paid that any mind because kids were paddled all the time back then. But she thought the man was trying to kill the little boy. So she stops the carriage, rushes over, and this meek little Southern belle from Mississippi wrestles little Jim away from this man. They go back to the carriage. She takes him home to the Confederate White House. She feeds him, clothes him in her own son's clothes, doctors his wounds because he was hurt really bad. They find out he's an orphan and a free child of color, and this is the story left out of the history books. I'm not kidding. The President of the Confederacy legally adopts this little black boy. Quite a story. This is a picture of him. It was taken a few days after they adopted him. If you take my card and email me, I'll send you a JPEG of this picture of Jim Limber. Okay? He lived with them as part of the Jeff Davis family for 2 years. When Richmond falls to the Yankees, the Davises lead, and they're on their way to Texas to continue the struggle. Okay? But they're captured in Georgia. The father, Jefferson Davis, is taken to prison where he will stay for 2 years. Another group of Yankee soldiers take little Jim Limber away from the family by force. They took him, the letters say, kicking and screaming. And he was never, ever heard from or seen again. Now, even today, if a child's taken from a family by that kind of violence, and you don't hear anything for years, what do you assume? You assume they're dead. And that's what we assume. And Jefferson Davis, who knew everybody of importance in the nation because he had been Secretary of War before the war between the states, never found out what happened to Jim Limber. So I said, I've got to tell this story. So I wrote the book, came out, and the book had such an impact that they actually made a statue for this little boy that was dedicated to him in Biloxi, Mississippi in the summer of 2010. If you write me, I'll be glad to send you a picture of that statue to go with your research and all. Now, I think it's a wonderful story that needs to be told. Now, I'm going to tell you, as a storyteller, I'm going to tell you the story again, but this time in a different form. This form is called Jim Limber's Ghost, and it's a poem that's on my CD, Bard of the South there. And it goes like this. Come, my children, and follow me to the old sad South of 1863. And I will tell you of a black orphan child, cold, hungry, yet so sweet and mild. Jim Limber is his name. Walk with me through those Richmond streets.